My name's Patricia, and this is the #1 English language short form podcast, Poetry P. Hello, and welcome to this week's edition, the one in which you get to hear some original split sequences written for our latest split sequence journal, Split Ps. Lots of S's in that sentence. First of all, for those of you not familiar with the split sequence, the founder of the form, Peter Jastrzębski, has been on the podcast a few times to tell us about them and to read some of his work. There will of course be some links in the show notes so you can go back and listen if you have a mind to. Today, I'll give you an inkling about the writing of them and, as I said, read some from the latest journal. And I'm happy to say I'm joined by some of the poets who are going to read their work to you. It's always a treat to listen to a poet read their own work. It brings a little extra to the party, doesn't it? So the split sequence begins with a 3-line haiku or senryu, and each of its lines inspires another haiku or senryu so that by the end you have a little story in poetry form. You can write them alone, or, and this is rather fun, write them in collaboration. Normally, you collaborate with only one other poet, but in this volume, Volume 2 of Split Ps, Terry French, Reed Hepworth and Sangeeta Kalarikal took this collaboration a step further and wrote a longer split sequence in a 3-way collaboration. So when Peter Jastrzębski, founder of the form, had read the second volume of Split Ps for the second time, he sent me an email and said of it, "I ask you, who amongst us can resist the spell of split sequences?" As you may well know, there's a phenomenon in sports and in the arts called sophomore slump. Happily, this issue of Split Ps dodged that issue completely, being even more confident and skilled than its debut issue. Well, I have to admit my ignorance. I did not know of the sophomore slump. Apparently, it's a period of reduced motivation, excitement or performance that can occur during a student's second year of college or high school. Or, in other contexts, like an athlete's second season or an artist's second album after a successful debut. Thanks for the compliment, Peter. Now, if I'm honest, I'm a little anxious for Volume 3 next year, but I'm sure when I put out the call, you poets will not let me down. So let's hear some sequences. When I put the journal together, I asked Peter, rather than write a foreword as he'd done the previous year, would he help me introduce the journal by writing a couple of sequences with me? So to kick off today, and to illustrate the form, I'm going to read one of our sequences. Zodiac Akimbo by Peter Jastrzębski and Bishi. And Peter, I should say, wrote the seed poem. Moon chatter. Glue vine under the Christmas lights, something stirring. Another night. Mutual glow, another sip to spice things up. In the 5th house. Swiping left, again and again. Hunter's moon. Now a little explanation to take you through it. The 1st, 5th and 9th lines are the seed poem. And in this instance, Peter's seed poem is Moon chatter. Another night in the 5th house. Each line in the seed poem is followed by another verse. And in a collaborative split sequence, the first line of the seed poem is followed by a verse from the person who is collaborating and who didn't write the seed poem. The second verse, following the second line, is by the person who wrote the seed poem, and the third verse, following the third line of the seed poem, is back to the collaborator. So in this instance, I wrote the verse that begins Glühwein and the verse that begins swiping left, and the rest is Peter's. And that's how all the collaborative poems will follow. Let's hear it again. Moon chatter. Glühwein under the Christmas lights. Something stirring. Another night. Mutual glow. Another sip to spice things up. In the fifth house. Swiping left again and again. Hunter's moon. The next is a sequence by Adele Evershed called Deep in the Heart. Praying. First frost, a whisper of winter in his voice. For a red sky tonight. Deus Vult, new crusaders, same old motto. Another missed period. Travel moon, she looks up how to move out of Texas. Deep in the Heart by Adele Evershed. Praying. First frost, a whisper of winter in his voice. For a red sky tonight. Deus Vult, new crusaders, same old motto. Another missed period. Travel moon, she looks up how to move out of Texas. And the next solo split sequence is from Peter Jastrzemski himself, and it's called Grey Matters. Senior wellness, mid-mug, morning stretches until empty. A new body part, slow aging, inch by inch, cliffhangers. On the watch list. Sunset Drive, a new love for unmarked highways. Grey Matters by Peter Jastrzemski. Senior wellness, mid-mug, morning stretches until empty. A new body part, slow aging, inch by inch, cliffhangers. On the watch list. Sunset Drive, a new love for unmarked highways. And now I'm joined by Bona M. Santos and Richard L. Matter, who are going to read their sequence for you.
Calculus.
A child watches.
Moving pieces. The den becomes another bedroom.
An egg hatch. Solarium. Catching first light. A young butterfly. Mom's math mistake.
What a surprise, she exclaims. You'll have a sibling. Calculus.
A child watches.
Moving pieces. The den becomes another bedroom.
An egg hatch. Solarium. Catching first light. A young butterfly. Mom's math mistake.
What a surprise, she exclaims. You'll have a sibling.
In this next sequence, I learnt a new word. Anhedonia. I always appreciate learning something new, don't you? What does it mean? Well, some of you will know this already, but it means a lack of pleasure or of the capacity to experience it. So let's hear the sequence that taught me a new word. Anhedonia by Ivanka Ettinger. Into the haze. Shame spiral once again round and round. Stuck on a snail trail. Late night, putting it all off until tomorrow. Out of the hollow. Unable to change. Pajama day. Anhedonia by Ivanka Ettinger. Into the haze. Shame spiral once again round and round. Stuck on a snail trail. Late night, putting it all off until tomorrow. Out of the hollow. Unable to change. Pajama day. And now it's a pleasure to welcome back Randy Brooks, who's going to read his sequence to you.
Underground Railroad by Randy Brooks. Good night prayer. Oblong hymn book bound by slaves. A promised land. My boy asks why. Runaway raft drifts under the bridge, white as snow. Slaves were slaves. Underground Railroad. A Mississippi river town no one knows. Underground Railroad by Randy Brooks. Good night prayer. Oblong hymn book bound by slaves. A promised land. My boy asks why. Runaway raft drifts under the bridge, white as snow. Slaves were slaves. Underground Railroad. A Mississippi river town no one knows.
Those of you who listened to the Celebration of Haiku podcast last week will be very familiar with the next poet's work. Tracy Davidson has written a bittersweet sequence, a drop of humour with a biting finish. Paper Cuts by Tracy Davidson. Whispers. A missing diary stuffed full of secrets. By the water cooler. Soaking up the juiciest titbits. No one meets my gaze. How thick the ink in a poison pen. Paper Cuts by Tracy Davidson. Whispers. A missing diary stuffed full of secrets. By the water cooler. Soaking up the juiciest titbits. No one meets my gaze. How thick the ink in a poison pen. Now I have a question for you. What do you feel when you hear the next sequence? I think there's a masterful use of Kigo in the seed haiku, which sets the tone. Which reminds me, have you written to me with your thoughts on nature versus season in haiku? And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you need to go and listen to last week's podcast. But here, have a think about this one. Detachment by Kim Klue. Autumn leaves. From her window, watching the shades deepen. This longing, each year, the growing ache of new loss. To let go. Sunset, the last maple leaf, softly adrift. Detachment by Kim Klue. Autumn leaves. From her window, watching the shades deepen. This longing, each year the growing ache of new loss. To let go. Sunset, the last maple leaf, softly adrift. And I have one last solo sequence, this time from Scott Wigerman, who at least, when I read it, has written a humorous sequence with elements of sadness. What do you think? Countdown by Scott Wigerman. One by one, liquor bottles to the last drop, the good stuff. Sober guests exit. Slow division, the hardcore and the strays. Recycling bin. Slog to the curb, clink and clatter of the empties. Countdown by Scott Wigerman. One by one, liquor bottles to the last drop, the good stuff. Sober guests exit. Slow division, the hardcore and the strays. Recycling bin. Slog to the curb, clink and clatter of the empties. Finally, I'm joined by CX Turner and Kimberly Kuchar, who you may remember were judges on the recent sci-fi podcast. Well, they collaborated on a sequence that I chose as my editor's choice. And it was well-deserved because, as we know, there were a lot of top-notch poets and poetry in this journal. Take it away, CX Turner and Kimberly Kuchar.
In the Quiet Wake by CX Turner and Kimberly Kuchar. Autumn dusk.
Diagnosis. He holds tightly to her hand.
The journey narrows. Kettle whistling, softly in the quiet, her voice rises to a thread of gold.
New necklace. 1 year in remission.
In the Quiet Wake by CX Turner and Kimberly Kuchar. Autumn dusk.
Diagnosis. He holds tightly to her hand.
The journey narrows. Kettle whistling, softly in the quiet, her voice rises to a thread of gold.
New necklace. 1 year in remission.
This is what I wrote in the journal as my commentary on the piece. Writing haiku and senryu is more difficult than many think. It's a skill that requires knowledge, practice, and craft. Writing a split sequence is harder. There are 4 haiku or senryu. The sequence should show you a story, and the final verse should absolutely nail the ending, give you something you weren't necessarily expecting. To top it all, you need a title, a meaningful one. This is hard to achieve when writing alone, but I wonder, is it easier when collaborating? Certainly from my experience, the back and forth adds a new dynamic to one's writing. And of course, when in doubt, you have a partner to share your questions with. This sequence is an excellent example of what can be achieved when writing split sequences. The title suggests an idea of a wake, a death, something the seed poem could be confirming. Autumn dusk. The journey narrows to a thread of gold. Autumn, as we know, suggests the year heading towards its close. And we are told the journey for the protagonist in this poem is narrowing. And we're left to wonder if that thread of gold might just be symbolic of the divine, of an immortal life, one to be achieved at the conclusion of this earthly one. Or is it simply that stretch of sky as the sun goes down, shimmering gold? The poem continues towards a deathly conclusion, a diagnosis, a kettle whistling softly in the quiet. If you've ever sat with a patient receiving bad news, or by the bedside of a dying loved one, the quiet might well strike you. However, we have a turning point in this sequence. Hope arrives. Her voice rises. That would be an unusual description of a dying person, wouldn't it? The body, the voice, the breath becomes weaker as the person moves towards those final moments. I would not expect a rising of her voice. Would you? In the final verse, we have salvation, not of a divine celestial nature, but a human scientific one, a year in remission, and a celebration of that year in the form of a thread of gold, a new necklace. A surprise, a happy surprise ending to the story. C.X. Turner and Kimberly Kuchar have taken us on an emotional roller coaster in a well-crafted split sequence. I hope you agree with that one. And when you've read the journal, perhaps you'll tell me whether you agree with my choice or whether you would have made a different choice. If you'd like to read these sequences, and the many more that are in the second volume of Split Peas, it's available in a lovely print version. Not only is it a cracking read, as the founder of the form has said, but all proceeds help to keep Poetry Pea going. I'll put a link in the show notes. Many thanks for joining me today. I hope wherever you are, you're fit and well. And of course, thanks to all the poets who were able to record their poetry for me. It was a bit of an experiment we were trying, but I think it worked, don't you? I have a couple of missions for you this week. Check out the Poetry Pea video prompt on the YouTube channel. Leave your poems in the comments section. Please don't send them to me. They're for Linda. And if you could, do buy Split Peas Volume 2, and maybe even Volume 1 if you haven't got that. Oh, and I've thought of another one. If you have bought either of them, perhaps you'd leave us a review on Amazon. It'll help other people to find the journal. And perhaps write some split sequences to be in Volume 3. So until we meet again next week, with something a bit special, as always. In this case, I'm doing a bit of an experiment with two lovely chaps that I really want your thoughts on. Anyway, till then, keep writing. And don't forget to check out the show notes for all the links. Ciao!